Maria Santos sat in the waiting room of the small medical clinic, her palms sweating as she gripped her husband Carlos's hand. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the outdated magazines scattered across the coffee table. She had been coming to this same clinic since she was a child, but today felt different. Today, she was hoping for answers that might change everything. For 3 long years, Maria and Carlos had been trying to start a family. At first, they weren't worried. Maria was only 25 when they got married, and everyone told them to relax and let nature take its course. Her mother-in-law would pat her belly every Sunday after church and say with a knowing smile, "Soon, Mia, soon you'll give me grandchildren." But months turned into years, and Maria's monthly disappointment grew heavier each time. The nurse called her name, and Maria's heart began racing. Dr. Peterson had been the family doctor in their small New Mexico town for over 30 years. He delivered Maria when she was born, gave her shots when she was little, and treated her scraped knees when she fell off her bicycle. Now, he was about to tell her why her deepest dreams seemed impossible to reach. Dr. Peterson's office smelled like antiseptic and old leather. His medical degree hung crooked on the wall behind his desk, and a small cactus plant sat wilting in the corner. Maria noticed these details as if seeing them for the first time, her mind desperately trying to focus on anything except the manila folder in the doctor's hands. "Maria, Carlos," Dr. Peterson began, his voice gentle but serious, "I've received the results from all your tests." He opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in medical terms that meant nothing to Maria. "I'm afraid the news isn't what we were hoping for." Maria felt the world shift beneath her feet. Carlos squeezed her hand tighter, but she could already feel him pulling away emotionally. She had seen that look in his eyes before, the same expression he wore when his favorite horse had to be put down last year. It was the look of someone preparing for loss. "The tests show that Maria has severe fertility issues," Dr. Peterson continued, his words careful and measured. "Her fallopian tubes are blocked, and there are other complications that make natural conception extremely unlikely." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the small room. "I know this isn't easy to hear, but I want you both to understand the reality of the situation." Maria stared at the test results, the black ink swimming before her eyes. She had always imagined herself as a mother. As a little girl, she would wrap her dolls in blankets and pretend to feed them bottles. In high school, she babysat for neighbors and felt a deep joy when the children would run to her with skinned knees or bedtime stories. When she married Carlos, they talked for hours about their future children, choosing names and imagining family. "Vacations, what about treatments?" Carlos asked, his voice strained. "Surgery, medicine, there has to be something." Dr. Peterson shook his head slowly. In a bigger city, there might be some expensive procedures, but even then, the success rates would be very low. And honestly, Carlos, those treatments cost more money than most folks around here see in a lifetime. Maria knew he was right. Carlos worked at the local ranch, and she cleaned houses for wealthy families in town. They lived paycheck to paycheck, saving every penny for the family they thought they would have. The idea of spending thousands of dollars on treatments that might not work felt impossible. The drive home was silent except for the sound of gravel crunching under their truck tires. Maria stared out the window at the desert landscape she had known her whole life. The mountains in the distance looked the same as always, but everything felt different now. She was different now. Their small adobe house sat at the edge of town, surrounded by sparse desert plants and a few struggling fruit trees. Carlos had built a wooden swing on the old cottonwood tree in their backyard, saying it would be perfect for their children someday. Now, as Maria looked at that empty swing, it felt like a mockery of her broken dreams. That evening, Carlos barely touched his dinner. He pushed the beans around his plate and avoided looking at Maria directly. She tried to start conversations about normal things, about his day at work or the weather, but his responses were short and distant. After dinner, he went outside and sat on the porch steps, smoking cigarette after cigarette, something he only did when he was deeply troubled. Maria cleaned the dishes slowly, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced. She kept thinking about her sister Elena, who lived in the next town over. Elena had 3 beautiful children and was pregnant with her 4th. Every family gathering, Elena would complain about how tired she was, how expensive children were, how she never had time for herself anymore. Maria had always listened patiently, secretly longing for those same problems. Around 10 o'clock, Maria heard Carlos moving around in their bedroom. She found him pulling clothes from their shared dresser and stuffing them into an old duffel bag. Her heart dropped to her stomach. "What are you doing?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Carlos didn't look at her. "I can't do this, Maria. I can't pretend this doesn't change everything." "But we can adopt," Maria said quickly, desperation creeping into her voice. "There are children who need families. We could give a home to a child who—" "It's not the same," Carlos interrupted, finally meeting her eyes. "I want my own children, my own blood, my family name to continue." He zipped up the bag and slung it over his shoulder. "My mother was right about you." Those last words hit Maria like a physical blow. Carlos's mother had never liked her, had always made comments about Maria's small frame and questioned whether she would be able to bear strong children. Now, it seemed, those cruel doubts had proven true. "Please don't leave," Maria whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "We can work through this together. We love each other." Carlos paused at the bedroom door, his back still turned to her. "Love isn't enough, Maria. A man needs children to carry on his legacy. What's the point of working and building a life if there's no one to pass it on to?" The sound of his truck starting up echoed through the quiet desert night. Maria stood at the living room window and watched the red taillights disappear down the dusty road. In the span of one day, she had lost not only her dream of becoming a mother, but also her husband and her future as she had imagined it. She sank onto their old couch, the same one they had bought together when they first got married. Everything in the house reminded her of the life they had planned together. The extra bedroom they had painted yellow because it would work for either a boy or a girl. The high chair Carlos's father had made from wood waiting in the closet for a grandchild, who would never come as the hours passed. Maria realized that her heartbreak was deeper than just losing Carlos. She was mourning the children she would never have, the school plays she would never attend, the bedtime stories she would never read, the scraped knees she would never kiss better. She was grieving for a future that had been snatched away by cruel biology and a society that measured a woman's worth by her ability to bear children. The desert wind rattled the windows, and Maria pulled a blanket around her shoulders. Tomorrow, she would have to face the questions and the pity. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to rebuild a life she had never imagined living. But tonight, she simply sat in the darkness and mourned for everything she had lost. The morning after Carlos left, Maria woke up on the couch with a stiff neck and swollen eyes. For a brief moment, she forgot what had happened. Then reality crashed down on her like a bucket of cold water. The empty coffee cup on Carlos's side of the bed, the missing toothbrush from the bathroom sink, the silence where his morning radio show used to play. Everything reminded her that her life had changed forever. She was still in her pajamas when she heard a car door slam outside. Through the thin curtains, she could see Carlos's mother Carmen getting out of her old sedan. Carmen was a small woman, but she carried herself like a general preparing for battle. Maria's stomach twisted into knots. She knew this visit wouldn't be friendly. Carmen didn't bother knocking. She used the spare key that Carlos had given her years ago, the same key Maria had always wished they could take back. The older woman walked straight into the living room, her eyes scanning the house like she was taking inventory. "Where is my son?" Carmen demanded, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "He left last night," Maria said quietly, wrapping her bathrobe tighter around herself. "After we got the news from the doctor." Carmen's face showed no surprise, only grim satisfaction. "Good. He finally came to his senses." She opened her large purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a list of everything that belongs to the Herrera family. I'm here to collect what's rightfully ours." Maria looked at the handwritten list with growing disbelief. Carmen had written down nearly everything of value in the house. The hand-carved wooden cross that had hung above their bed for 3 years, the silver picture frames that held their wedding photos, the ceramic dishes that Carlos's grandmother had painted by hand, even the small statue of the Virgin Mary that sat on their kitchen windowsill. But these were wedding gifts, Maria protested. They were given to both of us. They were given to Carlos and his future family, Carmen corrected sharply. Since you can't give him children, you're no longer part of this family. She walked to the bedroom and began taking down the wooden cross. My great-grandmother carved this with her own hands. It was meant to bless the children of this house. What use is it to you now? Each item Carmen packed felt like another piece of Maria's heart being torn away. The silver frames had held pictures of their happiest moments, their wedding day, their first anniversary, the vacation they took to see Carlos's cousin in Colorado. Now Carmen was wrapping them in newspaper like they were worthless garage sale finds. You can keep the furniture, Carmen said with fake generosity. Carlos bought most of it new anyway. But anything with family history comes back to the family. When Carmen reached for the ceramic dishes, Maria couldn't stay silent anymore. Those dishes were Carlos's grandmother's way of welcoming me into the family. She gave them to me personally on our wedding day. She said I was the daughter she never had. Carmen's laugh was cold and bitter. My mother-in-law was always too soft-hearted. She saw what she wanted to see. She carefully wrapped each dish in tissue paper. A real daughter would have given her great-grandchildren. You're just a woman who wasted 3 years of my son's life. The words stung worse than any physical blow. Maria had loved Carlos's grandmother, who had passed away 2 years earlier. The old woman had taught Maria family recipes and shared stories about the early days of their town. She had made Maria feel truly accepted for the first time since moving to Tierra Verde after her marriage. I loved her too, Maria whispered, tears starting to fall. She was like a real grandmother to me. Love doesn't matter when you can't fulfill your purpose as a wife, Carmen replied without emotion. She finished packing the dishes and moved on to the Virgin Mary statue. This blessed my family for 4 generations. It doesn't belong with a barren woman. That word barren hit Maria like a slap. It was an old-fashioned word, the kind used to describe empty fields or dried-up wells. But when applied to a woman, it carried a weight of shame and failure that felt crushing. After Carmen left with 2 boxes of family treasures, Maria sat alone in her suddenly emptier house. But her isolation was just beginning. Within hours, news of Carlos's departure had spread through their small town like wildfire. In a community where everyone knew everyone else's business, Maria's situation became the topic of every conversation. Her phone started ringing before noon. First, it was her neighbor Dolores, calling under the pretense of checking on her but really fishing for details. I saw Carlos's mother leaving with boxes, Dolores said with fake concern. Is everything all right, dear? Then her cousin Patricia called from across town. My friend saw Carlos at the gas station this morning, putting his bags in his truck. She said he looked upset. What happened? Each call felt like another small humiliation. Maria could hear the curiosity in their voices, the hunger for gossip. That would fuel conversations at the grocery store and beauty salon for weeks to come. She stopped answering the phone after the 5th call, but she couldn't avoid her own family forever. Her mother Rosa arrived on Thursday afternoon, bringing her famous chicken soup and a disapproving frown. Rosa was a deeply religious woman who believed that everything happened according to God's plan. She set the soup on the kitchen counter and looked around the house with critical eyes. I heard what the doctor said, Rosa began, her voice heavy with disappointment. And I heard about Carlos leaving. Mama, I need your support right now, Maria said, hoping for comfort from the woman who had raised her. Instead, Rosa shook her head sadly. Mia, sometimes God closes doors to show us we're walking the wrong path. Maybe this is his way of telling you to accept a different calling in life. What do you mean? Rosa sat down at the kitchen table and folded her hands. Sister, Catherine at the church has been looking for someone to help with the children's religious education. And there's always room at the convent for women who want to serve God in other ways. Maria stared at her mother in shock. You're suggesting I become a nun? It's not such a terrible life, Rosa said defensively. You could dedicate yourself to serving God and helping other people's children. It might be exactly what you need. The suggestion felt like another betrayal. Instead of offering comfort or support, her own mother was essentially telling her to give up on normal life entirely, as if being unable to have children meant she couldn't have love, companionship, or a full life as a woman. Her father Miguel's reaction was even worse. When Maria visited her parents' house on Sunday, hoping to find some peace in familiar surroundings, he barely acknowledged her presence. During dinner, he talked to everyone except her. When she tried to join conversations, he would change the subject or simply stop talking altogether. Papa, please, Maria finally said. I'm still your daughter. Miguel looked at her with tired eyes. A daughter brings honor to her family. She marries well and gives her parents grandchildren to spoil. She continues the family line. He shook his head slowly. I don't know what you are anymore. Her younger sister Elena's reaction was perhaps the most painful of all. Elena was 26, married to a good man named Roberto, and pregnant with her fourth child. She was everything Maria had once hoped to be: a successful wife and mother, glowing with the confidence that came from fulfilling society's expectations. They met at their parents' house on a warm Saturday afternoon. Elena sat in the shade of the porch, one hand resting on her rounded belly while her three other children played in the yard. She looked like a picture from a magazine about perfect families. I'm sorry about Carlos, Elena said, though her tone lacked real sympathy, but maybe it's for the best. Roberto says a marriage without children isn't really a marriage at all. That's easy for you to say, Maria replied, trying to keep the bitterness out of her voice. You've never had trouble getting pregnant, Elena shrugged. That's because God blessed me with good health and a strong body. Maybe if you had taken better care of yourself, eaten better food, prayed more. She let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. You think this is my fault? I think everything happens for a reason, Elena said, echoing their mother's religious fatalism. Maybe God knew you wouldn't be a good mother. Maybe he's protecting children from being raised by someone who isn't meant for that life. The cruelty of those words took Maria's breath away. To hear such things from strangers would have been painful enough, but to hear them from her own sister felt like the ultimate betrayal. As the weeks passed, Maria found herself increasingly isolated in her own community. At the grocery store, conversations would stop when she walked by. At church, other women would offer her tight-lipped smiles and change the subject when she approached. Children who had once run to hug her now seemed shy and uncertain, as if her condition might somehow be contagious. The breaking point came during Elena's baby shower, which Maria attended out of family obligation. She sat in the corner watching other women celebrate new life while she felt like a symbol of everything that could go wrong. When it came time to play games about baby names and nursery themes, the hostess quietly suggested that Maria might be more comfortable helping in the kitchen instead. That night, Maria made a decision that surprised even herself. She would leave Tierra Verde. She would pack her remaining belongings, sell the house, and start over somewhere new. The moving truck pulled away from Maria's old house on a dusty Tuesday morning, leaving tire tracks in the gravel driveway like scars on her past. She sat in her beat-up Honda Civic, the back seat packed with the few belongings that Carmen hadn't claimed and Elena hadn't judged. Everything she owned now fit into one car and a small storage unit back in Tierra Verde. It felt both heartbreaking and oddly freeing. Albuquerque was only 2 hours away, but it might as well have been another planet. The city sprawled across the desert valley, full of strangers who didn't know her story. As Maria drove through the busy streets for the first time, she felt invisible in a way that was both lonely and comforting. Here, nobody knew she was the woman who couldn't have children. Nobody whispered about her behind their hands or looked at her with pity. Finding an apartment had been harder than she expected. Most landlords wanted first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit money that Maria simply didn't have after selling her house for barely enough to pay off the mortgage. She spent 3 nights sleeping in her car in a well-lit parking lot near a 24-hour diner, using the restaurant's bathroom to wash her face and brush her teeth each morning. On her 4th day in the city, she found a tiny studio apartment above Rodriguez's laundromat on Central Avenue. The landlord, an elderly man named Mr. Rodriguez, took pity on her when she honestly explained her situation. The apartment was small, basically 1 room with a kitchenette and a bathroom, but it was clean and safe, and the rent was something she could afford. The washing machines run all day and most of the night. Mr. Rodriguez warned her as they climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment. Some people find the noise annoying. Maria listened to the steady rhythm of the machines below and found it oddly comforting. "It sounds like a heartbeat," she said softly. "I think I'll like it." The apartment came furnished with basic necessities: a small bed, a table with 2 chairs, a tiny refrigerator, and an old television that got 3 channels clearly. Maria unpacked her few belongings and tried to make the space feel like home. She hung her grandmother's embroidered tablecloth over the small table and placed her one remaining family photo, picture of her parents from their wedding day, on the WINDOWSILL. Finding work proved easier than finding housing. Albuquerque had several alterations shops, and Maria's reputation as a skilled seamstress had somehow preceded her. Mrs. Chun, who owned Perfect Fit Alterations downtown, hired Maria after a brief interview and a demonstration of her hemming technique. "You have good hands," Mrs. Chun observed, watching Maria work. "Steady and careful, that's what this job needs." The shop was small but busy, located in a strip mall between a used bookstore and a tax preparation office. Maria worked alone most days, surrounded by racks of wedding dresses, business suits, and everyday clothes that needed to be shortened, lengthened, or taken in. The work was detailed and time-consuming, requiring complete focus exactly what she needed to keep her mind occupied. Her days quickly fell into a routine that felt safe in its predictability. She would wake up at 6:30 to the sound of the first loads of laundry starting downstairs. After a simple breakfast of coffee and toast, she would walk the 6 blocks to work, arriving before Mrs. Chun to open the shop and organize the day's projects. The customers were mostly strangers, people who chatted politely while she pinned their hems or marked alterations with chalk. They talked about their jobs, their weekend plans, their children's school activities. Maria became skilled at listening and asking the right questions to keep conversations flowing without revealing anything about herself. "You're so quiet," Mrs. Chun observed one afternoon as they worked side by side. "In China, we have a saying that still waters run deep. You have deep waters, I think." Maria smiled but didn't respond. She had become comfortable with her quietness, with being the person others talked to rather than the person who shared personal stories. It was easier that way. Evenings were the hardest time. After walking home from work, she would buy simple groceries from the corner market: bread, eggs, canned soup, whatever was cheap and easy to prepare. The elderly cashier Diego always tried to make conversation, but Maria kept their interactions brief and polite. Back in her apartment, she would eat dinner alone while watching the evening news on her small television. The constant noise of the washing machines below had indeed become comforting, like a mechanical lullaby that never stopped. But in the quiet moments between loads, when the machines paused before starting their next cycle, the silence felt overwhelming. She tried to fill those quiet hours with activities that would tire her mind enough to sleep. She would hand wash her work clothes in the tiny sink, organizing them carefully for the next day. She taught herself to cook new recipes from a cookbook she found at the used bookstore next to the shop. She even attempted to learn Spanish better by watching telenovelas, though the dramatic storylines often reminded her too much of her own life, but the loneliness always crept back in. Weekends were especially difficult because the alterations shop was closed, leaving Maria with 48 hours to fill. She would walk through different neighborhoods, observing families at parks and couples holding hands at coffee shops. She became a regular at the public library, spending hours reading romance novels and travel magazines. living vicariously through stories of love and adventure. The hardest moments came when she encountered children. At the grocery store, she would freeze when toddlers smiled at her from shopping carts or when she heard babies crying in nearby aisles. At the library, she had to avoid the children's section entirely because the sound of story time, a librarian reading to a group of enchanted kids, made her chest ache with longing. One Saturday afternoon, while walking through Old Town Albuquerque, she came across a small playground where families had gathered for what looked like a birthday party. Colorful balloons were tied to picnic tables, and children were running around playing tag while their parents watched and laughed. Maria found herself standing at the fence, watching a little girl with pigtails who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. The child was trying to go down a slide that was clearly too big for her, climbing up the ladder with determination despite her small size. When she finally reached the top, she called out, "Watch me, Mama," before sliding down with pure joy on her face. Her mother clapped and cheered like her daughter had just conquered Mount Everest. Maria felt tears running down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. She turned and walked away quickly, hoping nobody had noticed her watching. But the image of that little girl's triumphant face stayed with her for days, a reminder of all the moments she would never experience. The isolation became a way of life that she both embraced and resented. She convinced herself that this was better than facing judgment and pity, but deep down she knew she was just hiding from the world. She stopped calling her family entirely after her mother left several voicemails suggesting she visit Elena's new baby. She avoided making friends with her coworkers or neighbors, keeping all relationships superficial and safe. Months passed in this careful, controlled existence. Maria became an expert at managing her emotions, at pushing down thoughts that might lead to sadness or longing. She focused on the immediate tasks in front of her, hemming pants, taking in waists, replacing zippers. The detailed work required such concentration that hours would pass without her thinking about anything beyond the fabric in her hands. But sometimes, late at night when even the laundromat machines were quiet, she would lie in her small bed and wonder if this was all her life would ever be. Would she spend the next 30 years living alone above a laundromat, altering other people's clothes while her own life remained unchanged? Would she grow old without ever knowing the joy of tucking a child into bed or helping with homework or celebrating Christmas morning through a child's eyes? On those nights, she would press her hands against her stomach and whisper prayers to saints she wasn't sure were listening anymore. She would bargain with God, promising to be grateful for anything, any kind of family, any chance at motherhood, any way to fill the empty space inside her heart. She had no way of knowing that her prayers were about to be answered in the most unexpected way possible, that her carefully constructed world of solitude was about to be shattered by an act of kindness that would change everything, that her willingness to help a stranger in need would lead her to the family she never thought she could have. The rain had been falling steadily for 3 hours when Maria finally decided to close the alterations shop early. It was one of those rare desert storms that turned the usually dusty streets of Albuquerque into small rivers, and customers had stopped coming in around lunchtime. Mrs. Chen had left at noon to pick up her grandson from school, leaving Maria alone with a pile of hemming work that could easily wait until tomorrow. She gathered her things slowly, enjoying the peaceful sound of rain drumming against the shop windows. After months of the same routine, these quiet moments had become precious to her. She turned off the lights, locked the front door, and walked around to the back of the building where she had parked her car that morning. The alley behind the strip mall was narrow and poorly lit, flanked by dumpsters and the back doors of various businesses. During the day, delivery trucks used this space to unload supplies, but at night it was usually empty except for the occasional stray cat looking for food scraps. The rain had turned the unpaved ground into a muddy mess, and Maria picked her way carefully toward her car, trying to avoid the worst of the puddles. She was fishing for her keys in her purse when she heard voices coming from near the large dumpster behind the tax office. At first, she thought it might be employees taking out trash, but something in the tone made her pause. The voices were angry, aggressive, and getting louder. Go back where you came from, you freak! One voice shouted. Nobody wants your kind around here, added another. Maria froze, her keys halfway out of her purse. She recognized the sound of trouble, the kind of confrontation that could turn dangerous quickly. Her first instinct was to get in her car and drive away as fast as possible. She had learned to avoid conflict, to keep her head down and stay out of other people's problems, but then she heard a different voice, deeper and calmer than the others. I don't want any trouble, I'm just trying to get to my truck. Something about that voice made Maria look around the corner of the building. What she saw made her heart race with both fear and anger. 3 men in their 20s had cornered someone against the brick wall near the dumpster. The victim was massive, easily the largest person Maria had ever seen, but he was clearly trying to avoid a fight. His hands were raised peacefully, and he was backing away as much as the wall would allow. The 3 attackers looked like trouble. They wore identical baseball caps and work boots, and Maria could smell beer from 20 feet away. One of them was holding what looked like a piece of pipe, while another kept pushing the big man's shoulder, trying to provoke him into fighting back. Look at this giant savage, the one with the pipe sneered. Thinks he can just walk around our neighborhood like he owns the place. Maybe we should teach him a lesson about respecting his betters, said the pusher, shoving harder. Maria's hands started shaking. She knew she should call the police, but her phone was buried somewhere in her purse, and there wasn't time. The situation was escalating quickly, and the big man was running out of room to retreat. Despite his size, he seemed determined not to fight, which only made his attackers bolder. Please, the victim said quietly, his voice carrying a slight accent that Maria couldn't quite place. I don't want any problems. Let me go to my truck and I'll leave. You'll leave when we say you can leave, the third attacker said, pulling out what looked like a knife. That's when something inside Maria snapped. Maybe it was months of feeling powerless and helpless. Maybe it was the unfairness of 3 against 1 or the obvious racism in the attacker's words. Maybe it was simply that she couldn't stand to watch another person be humiliated and hurt while she did nothing, before she could talk herself out of it. Maria marched back into the shop and grabbed the baseball bat that Mrs. Chun kept behind the counter for protection. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it over the rain, but her hands felt steady as she gripped the wooden handle. She walked back outside and into the alley, her fear replaced by an anger she hadn't felt in months. Hey! She shouted, her voice carrying more authority than she knew she possessed. Leave him alone! The 3 men turned to stare at her, clearly surprised to see a small woman standing in the rain with a baseball bat. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the one with the pipe started laughing. Look, guys, we got ourselves a little rescue party, he said mockingly. What are you gonna do, lady? Hit us with your little stick. Maria raised the bat higher, surprised by how natural it felt in her hands. I'm going to call the police and tell them about 3 drunk men attacking someone with weapons. Then I'm going to make sure they see this. She held up her phone, which she had somehow managed to pull out of her purse. I've been recording everything. It was a bluff. She hadn't recorded anything, but the attackers didn't know that. They looked at each other uncertainly, clearly not expecting any witnesses to their cowardly behavior. You don't know what you're getting into, lady, the pusher said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when 3 grown men gang up on someone in my neighborhood, Maria replied, moving closer. Despite her fear. I may be small, but I'm not alone. Mrs. Patterson in the bookstore has already called 911. Another bluff. But it worked. The sound of sirens in the distance, probably heading to some other emergency, made the decision for them. The 3 attackers looked at each other, cursed loudly, and scattered in different directions. Running through the rain like the cowards they were, Maria stood there for a moment, shaking with adrenaline and disbelief at what she had just done. The baseball bat felt heavy in her hands now, and she realized she was soaked to the skin. But before she could process her own actions, she remembered the victim. He was still standing against the wall, one hand pressed to his forehead where blood was trickling down from a cut above his eye. In the dim light of the alley, Maria could see that he was indeed enormous, probably close to 7 feet tall and built like a tree trunk. His long black hair was wet from the rain, and his dark eyes were wide with surprise and gratitude. "Are you okay?" Maria asked, dropping the bat. And approaching him carefully, she pulled some tissues from her purse and held them out to him. "I think so," he said, accepting the tissues gratefully. His voice was deep and gentle, with an accent she now recognized as Native American. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Maria said simply. "Nobody deserves to be treated like that." She looked at his injuries in the better light near the back door of the shop. The cut above his eye was bleeding steadily, and his shirt was torn in 2 places. There were also scraped knuckles on his right hand, probably from when he had tried to protect himself. "You need to clean those cuts," she said. "Do you want me to call an ambulance?" He shook his head quickly. "No doctors." "No police, please." Maria understood that reaction. Sometimes getting help from official sources brought more problems than solutions, especially for people who looked different or didn't fit society's expectations. She made a quick decision. "Come inside," she said, unlocking the back door of the shop. "I have a first aid kit, and you can clean up before you go home." He hesitated, clearly not used to accepting help from strangers. "I don't want to be any trouble." "You're not trouble," Maria said firmly. "The trouble just ran away." Inside the warm, dry shop, Maria got her first clear look at her unexpected visitor. He was definitely Native American, with the kind of strong, weathered features that spoke of outdoor work and difficult experiences. Despite his intimidating size, there was something gentle about his eyes, a kindness that the attackers had either missed or chosen to ignore. She led him to the small break room behind the main shop area and motioned for him to sit in one of the plastic chairs while she retrieved the first aid kit from under the sink. The fluorescent light revealed that his injuries were worse than she had first thought. Besides the cut above his eye, there was a bruise forming on his left cheek and several scrapes on his arms. "What's your name?" she asked as she cleaned the cut with antiseptic. "Thomas," he said, wincing slightly as she worked. "Thomas Running." "Bear, I'm Maria Santos," she replied, "and I'm glad I was here tonight." As she bandaged his injuries, Thomas told her what had happened. He worked construction in the city during the week and lived in a small apartment near downtown. The 3 men had been harassing him for weeks, following him from job sites and making threats. Tonight, they had cornered him in the alley when he stopped to check on his truck, which had been parked behind the strip mall. "They called me names," he said quietly. "Said I didn't belong in their city. Said people like me should stay on the reservation where we can't bother decent folks." Maria felt a familiar pain in her chest, the ache of being rejected and judged for something beyond your control. "I'm sorry that happened to you. Some people are just cruel." "Most people just ignore it when they see it happening," Thomas said, looking at her with genuine curiosity. "Why didn't you?" Maria paused in her bandaging, considering the question. Why had she risked her safety for a complete stranger? Maybe it was because she knew what it felt like to be judged and dismissed. Maybe it was because she was tired of feeling powerless. Or maybe it was simply because helping others was the only way she knew how to feel useful anymore. Because it was the right thing to do. The next morning, Maria arrived at work expecting everything to return to normal. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and fresh, and she unlocked the shop with the same routine she had followed for months. But as she arranged the alterations for the day, she kept thinking about Thomas Running Bear and wondering if he had made it home safely around 10 o'clock. She heard a gentle knock on the back door of the shop. Her heart jumped, immediately thinking of the 3 men from the night before. But when she peered through the small window, she saw Thomas standing there, holding a brown paper bag and looking much better than he had the previous evening. "I hope I'm not bothering you," he said when she opened the door. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did." The cut above his eye was healing well, and the bruise on his cheek had faded to a dull yellow. He was wearing clean work clothes and steel-toed boots, clearly ready for another day of construction work. But what struck Maria most was how different he seemed in the daylight, less like a victim and more like the strong, capable man he obviously was. "You didn't have to come back," Maria said, though she was secretly pleased to see him. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks to you." He held out the paper bag. "My grandmother taught me to make traditional Apache bread. I thought you might like to try some." Maria accepted the bag with surprise. Inside were several pieces of golden brown bread that smelled like honey and herbs. It was still warm as if he had baked it just for her. "You made this yourself?" she asked, touched by the gesture. Thomas nodded, looking almost shy. "It's nothing fancy, but it's a family recipe. My grandmother said that sharing food is the best way to say thank you." They stood in the doorway for a moment, both unsure what to say next. Maria realized this was the first real conversation she had had with anyone in months that wasn't about work or business. Thomas seemed equally uncertain, as if he wasn't used to making friends outside his own community. "Would you like some coffee?" Maria found herself asking. "I always make too much, and Mrs. Chun won't be in until noon." Thomas hesitated. "I don't want to keep you from your work." "The work will wait," Maria said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "Come on in." The break room in the back of the shop was small and simple, with just a table, 2 chairs, and a coffee maker that had seen better days. Maria poured 2 cups of coffee while Thomas sat down carefully, his large frame making the plastic chair look like it belonged in a child's playroom. "Tell me about your grandmother," Maria said. Tasting the bread, it was delicious, sweet and nutty, with a texture unlike any bread she had ever tried. Thomas's face softened when he talked about his grandmother. She had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. She lived on the Mescalero Apache Reservation in southern New Mexico, about 3 hours from Albuquerque. She had taught him traditional cooking, storytelling, and the importance of helping others in need. "She always said that kindness creates circles," Thomas explained. "When you help someone, that kindness goes out into the world and eventually comes back to you. But you help me without expecting anything in return. That's the purest kind of kindness." Maria felt her throat tighten with emotion. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with such genuine appreciation. "I just did what anyone should do." "No," Thomas said firmly. "Most people would have walked away. You chose to get involved even though it was dangerous. That takes real courage." As they talked, Maria learned more about Thomas's life. He worked for a construction company that specialized in commercial buildings, office complexes, shopping centers, and apartment buildings. The work was hard and physical, but it paid well enough for him to support himself and send money back to his grandmother on the reservation. "Why don't you live on the reservation?" Maria asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee. Thoughtfully, "There's not much work there. Most of the young people leave to find jobs in the cities. I come back every weekend to visit my grandmother and help with whatever she needs, but during the week, I have to be here." Maria heard the loneliness in his voice and recognized it immediately. Like her, Thomas was caught between 2 worlds, not fully belonging in either place. He was too traditional for the city, but too modern for the reservation. He faced discrimination from people who saw only his size and his race, never bothering to learn about his kindness or intelligence. "Those men last night," Maria said carefully, "have they bothered you before?" Thomas nodded grimly. "They work for a different construction company that lost a bid to my company last month. They blame me personally, as if I make the business decisions," he shrugged. "Some people need someone to blame for their problems, and I'm an easy target. That's not fair." "Fair isn't something I expect anymore," Thomas said with sad acceptance. "I just try to do my job and stay out of trouble." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Chun, who looked surprised to see Maria entertaining a visitor. Thomas stood up quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I should go," he said. "I'm sure you have work to do." "Will you come back?" Maria asked, then felt embarrassed by how eager she sounded. Thomas smiled that transformative smile. "Again, if you want me to." I do, Maria said simply. After he left, Mrs. Chun raised her eyebrows at Maria. Big man, she observed. Native American? Apache, Maria confirmed, waiting for judgment or disapproval. Instead, Mrs. Chun nodded approvingly. Apache people are strong and loyal, good friends to have. She went back to her work, but Maria caught her smiling. Thomas did come back, the next day and then the day after that. What started as brief thank-you visits gradually became a daily routine. He would stop by the shop after work, sometimes bringing traditional foods his grandmother had taught him to make, sometimes just to talk about their days. Maria learned that Thomas was incredibly intelligent, despite having only a high school education. He read voraciously history books, biographies, and novels that he checked out from the library. He could discuss politics, current events, and philosophy with the kind of insight that came from careful thought rather than formal schooling. I always wanted to go to college, he admitted one afternoon as they shared coffee and leftover bread. But after my parents died, I had to work to help support my grandmother. By the time I could afford it, I felt too old to start. You're only 32, Maria pointed out. That's not too old for anything. Thomas looked at her with surprise. How do you know how old I am? Maria blushed. You mentioned it yesterday when you were talking about your parents' accident, 20 years ago when you were 12. You're a good listener, Thomas said. Most people hear but don't really listen. As the weeks passed, their friendship deepened in ways that surprised them both. Thomas began bringing work clothes to the shop for Maria to mend tears from job sites, worn hems, missing buttons. She never charged him for these repairs, and he never asked her to. It became an unspoken exchange of kindness. Maria found herself looking forward to Thomas's visits more than anything else in her carefully ordered life. For the first time in months, she had something to anticipate, someone to talk to who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. You're different from other people, Thomas told her one evening as they worked together in the shop. He was holding fabric steady while she operated the sewing machine. You don't judge. I've been judged plenty, Maria replied. I know how much it hurts. What happened to you? Thomas asked gently. You don't have to tell me, but I can see that someone hurt you badly. Maria's hands stilled on the sewing machine. She had never told anyone the full story of her marriage, her diagnosis, and her family's rejection. But something about Thomas's gentle presence made her feel safe enough to share. She told him everything about Carlos leaving, about Carmen, taking the family heirlooms, about her mother suggesting she become a nun, about her sister's cruel words at the baby shower. Thomas listened without interrupting, his dark eyes full of understanding and compassion. They were wrong, he said. When she finished, a woman's worth isn't measured by her ability to have children, just like a man's worth isn't measured by the color of his skin or the size of his body. Sometimes I wonder if they were right, though, Maria admitted. Maybe I'm not meant to be a mother. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and gently took her hand in his much larger one. There's nothing wrong with you, Maria Santos, he said firmly. You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. You stood up for a stranger when it would have been easier to walk away. You've made me feel welcome in a city where most people see me as a threat. If that's not motherly love, I don't know. What is? Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes, not tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude for finally finding someone who saw her worth. In the months since her diagnosis, she had begun to believe that she was fundamentally broken, that her inability to have children meant she couldn't love or nurture anyone, but Thomas made her see herself differently. Through his eyes, she wasn't a failure or a disappointment. She was a woman capable of great kindness and strength, someone worthy of friendship and respect. Thank you, she whispered, squeezing his hand. 3 months had passed since that rainy night in the alley, and Maria's life had taken on a rhythm she hadn't known she was capable of. Her days were still filled with hemming dresses and taking in waists, but now she had something to look forward to every evening. Thomas would arrive at the shop around 5:30, usually carrying something his grandmother had taught him to make or a book he thought Maria might enjoy. Their friendship had become the bright spot in both their lives. Thomas had stopped looking over his shoulder for the three men who had attacked him. They seemed to have moved on to easier targets. Maria had started smiling again, really smiling, not just the polite expression she wore for customers, Mrs. Chun had noticed the change and often commented on how much happier Maria seemed. "Love is good medicine," Mrs. Chun would say with a knowing look whenever Thomas stopped by. "We're just friends," Maria would protest, but lately she had begun to wonder if that was entirely true. She found herself thinking about Thomas during the day, looking forward to their conversations, and feeling genuinely happy in a way she hadn't experienced in years. On this particular Thursday evening, Maria was finishing up a complicated alteration on a wedding dress when she heard Thomas's familiar knock on the back door. But when she opened it, she immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Thomas stood in the doorway looking like a man who had been hit by a truck. His usually straight shoulders were slumped, his dark eyes were red-rimmed, and his hands shook slightly as he tried to smile at her. He was still wearing his work clothes, but they were wrinkled and dirty, as if he had been sitting on the ground somewhere. "Thomas, what happened?" Maria asked, immediately reaching for his arm to guide him inside. "I got a phone call at work today," he said, his deep voice barely above a whisper. From the tribal police back home, Maria's heart sank. She had never seen Thomas cry, but tears were streaming down his face now. She led him to the break room and made him sit down while she quickly locked the front door and turned off the main lights. Whatever news he had received, he needed privacy to process it. "Tell me," she said gently, sitting across from him and taking his large hands in her small ones. "It's my sister Rebecca," Thomas said, his voice breaking on the name. She was driving back from Roswell last night with her kids. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit them head-on. Maria felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard Thomas mention his sister before, a single mother who worked as a nurse at the reservation clinic. She was only 28, just 2 years younger than Maria herself. "Is she?" Maria couldn't bring herself to finish the question. Thomas nodded, fresh tears flowing. "She died at the hospital this morning. The doctors tried everything, but her injuries were too severe." Maria covered her mouth with her hands, feeling sick with grief for a woman she had never met but had grown to care about through Thomas's stories. Rebecca had raised her 4 children alone after her husband died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. She had been Thomas's closest family member besides their grandmother, the one person who truly understood his struggle to balance traditional life with modern necessities. "What about the children?" Maria asked, though she dreaded the answer. That's the worst part," Thomas said, his voice filled with anguish. "They survived. All 4 of them. Joseph is 8, the twins Anna and Sarah are 6, and little David just turned 2 last month. They're in the hospital now with cuts and bruises, but they're physically okay." Maria felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. The children were alive, but they were now orphans facing an uncertain future. "Rebecca named me as their guardian in her will," Thomas continued. "But there's a problem. The tribal council is meeting tomorrow to decide what to do with them. They're saying that since I'm unmarried and live off the reservation, I can't take care of 4 children by myself." "That's ridiculous," Maria said angrily. "You're their uncle. Your family—" The council doesn't see it that way," Thomas replied bitterly. "They think the children need a stable home with 2 parents, preferably on the reservation where they can learn traditional ways. Since I don't fit their idea of a proper guardian, they're talking about placing the kids in foster care." The word foster care hit Maria like a physical blow. She had heard horror stories about children lost in the system, bounced from home to home, separated from their siblings and their culture. The thought of Thomas's nieces and nephews experiencing that kind of trauma on top of losing their mother was unbearable. "Can't you fight it?" she asked. "Get a lawyer or something?" Thomas shook his head helplessly. "With what money? And even if I could afford a lawyer, the council has a point. How can I take care of 4 children when I work construction 10 hours a day? Who would watch them while I'm at work? How would I help them with homework or take care of them when they're sick?" As Thomas spoke, Maria could see the full weight of his dilemma. He loved those children fiercely. She could hear it in every word he spoke about them. But he was a single man living in a small apartment in a city where he had no support system. The practical challenges of suddenly becoming a father to 4 grieving children seemed insurmountable. "Tell me about them," Maria said softly, wanting to understand what Thomas was facing. Thomas's expression softened despite his pain. "Joseph is the oldest. He's 8 and really smart, but he's been the man of the house since his father died. He feels responsible for protecting his little brother and sisters. The twins, Anna and Sarah, are like 2 parts of the same person. They do everything together and have their own language that only they understand. And David ... Thomas's voice caught. "David is just a baby. He still calls for his mama when he wakes up from naps." Maria's heart ached as she imagined these 4 children lying in hospital beds, probably scared and confused, not understanding why their mother wasn't coming to comfort them. She thought about 8-year-old Joseph trying to be brave for his younger siblings, about the twins clinging to each other for comfort, about baby David crying for a mother who would never come. "The council meeting is tomorrow morning," Thomas continued. "If I can't convince them that I can provide a stable home, they'll start the process of placing the children in foster care. Once that happens, there's no guarantee they'll stay together. Joseph might go to one family, the twins to another, and David to a third." "They can't split them up," Maria said, horrified. "They've just lost their mother. They need each other now more than ever. The council says they'll try to keep them together, but there aren't many families willing to take 4 children at once, especially 4 children who are going to need a lot of help dealing with their grief." Thomas buried his face in his hands, and Maria could see that he felt completely powerless. Here was a man who could build houses with his bare hands, who had faced down discrimination and violence with quiet strength, but he couldn't protect the children he loved from being separated and lost in the system. "I keep thinking about what Rebecca would want," he said quietly. "She trusted me enough to name me as their guardian. She believed I could take care of them. But maybe the council is right. Maybe I'm not enough." "Don't say that," Maria said firmly. "You're exactly what those children need. You love them, you understand their culture, and you would do anything to protect them. Love isn't enough if—" "I can't provide practical care," Thomas replied. "What do I know about raising children? I've never even been married. I don't know how to braid little girls' hair or help with homework or deal with a toddler's tantrums." As Maria listened to Thomas's fears, something began stirring in her heart. She thought about all the children she had dreamed of raising, all the love she had stored up with nowhere to direct it. She imagined 4 scared children who needed someone to hold them while they cried, to make them feel safe, to show them that they were still loved even though their world had been shattered. What if you weren't unmarried? She heard herself. Thomas looked up at her with confusion. "What do you mean?" Maria's heart was racing, but her voice remained steady. "What if you had a wife? Someone who could help you take care of the children? Would the council consider you then?" "I suppose they might," Thomas said slowly. "But Maria, I don't have time to find someone and get married before tomorrow's meeting. And even if I did, what woman would agree to suddenly become mother to 4? Children she's never met?" Maria took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change both their lives forever. "I would." Thomas stared at her in shock. "What?" "I would marry you," Maria said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Not for romance or because we're in love, but because those children need both of us. They need a father who loves them and understands their heritage, and they need a mother who can care for them while you work." "Maria, you can't be serious," Thomas said, but she could see hope beginning to flicker in his eyes. "You don't even know them." "They're not your responsibility. I know you," Maria replied. "And I know that any children you love must be pretty special. Besides, I've always wanted to be a mother. Maybe this is how it's supposed to happen." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Maria could almost see his mind working through the possibilities. Finally he spoke. Maria barely slept that night. She lay in her small bed above the laundromat, listening to the washing machines humming below and thinking about what she had just committed to do. In less than 12 hours, she would be driving to the courthouse with Thomas to get married. By evening, she would legally be the stepmother of 4 children she had never met. Children who were lying in a hospital bed 3 hours away, grieving for their mother. The practical part of her mind kept listing all the reasons this was crazy. She didn't know how to take care of children. She had never lived on a reservation. She would be giving up her job, her apartment, and the small independence she had worked so hard to build. But every time doubt crept in, she thought about 8-year-old Joseph trying to protect his siblings, about the twins who might be separated, about baby David crying for his mama Dot at 5 in the morning. She gave up trying to sleep and started packing. She didn't have much to take: a few clothes, some personal items, her grandmother's tablecloth, and the family photo that had sat on her windowsill. Everything else could be left behind or sold later. Mrs. Chun would understand, and Mr. Rodriguez could easily find another tenant for the studio apartment. Thomas arrived at 7, looking like he hadn't slept either. He was wearing his best jeans and a clean button-down shirt, and he had braided his long hair back neatly. Despite his exhaustion, there was a determination in his eyes that hadn't been there the night before. "Are you ready for this?" he asked as they loaded Maria's belongings into his pickup truck. "As ready as I can be," Maria replied. Though her hands were shaking as she locked the apartment door for the last time, the drive to the courthouse was quiet at first. Both of them seemed lost in their own thoughts about what they were about to do. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. "I called the tribal council this morning," he said. "I told them I was getting married today and that my wife and I wanted to petition for custody of the children together." "What did they say?" "They seemed surprised, but they agreed to postpone the foster care proceedings until we can present our case." Thomas glanced at her. "They want to meet you, Maria. They want to make sure this marriage is real and not just something we made up to get the children." Maria's stomach twisted with nervousness. "What if they don't believe us?" "What? If they think we're lying?" "Then we make them believe us," Thomas said firmly. "We tell them the truth, that we care about each other and we both want to give those children a safe, loving home." The courthouse was a small, gray building that looked like it had been built in the 1960s and hadn't been updated since. Inside, the floors were worn linoleum and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Maria had imagined her wedding day many times over the years, but it had never looked like this. They filled out paperwork at the clerk's office, answering questions about their addresses, previous marriages, and next of kin. When the clerk asked how long they had known each other, Thomas answered, 3 months, and Maria could see the woman raise her eyebrows slightly. "It's not uncommon," the clerk said diplomatically. "Some people know right away when they found the right person." The justice of the peace who performed the ceremony was a kind-faced woman in her 60s named Judge Martinez. She had obviously done hundreds of these simple courthouse weddings, but she treated Maria and Thomas with the same respect she would have given any couple. "Do you have rings?" Judge Martinez asked. Maria's heart sank. In all the rush and emotion of the previous night, neither of them had thought about wedding rings. But Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "This was my grandmother's," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple silver ring set with a piece of turquoise. "She gave it to me years ago and told me to save it for the woman I married. I called her this morning and told her what we were doing. She said Rebecca would want you to have it." Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes as Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger. It was too big. His grandmother had apparently had larger hands, but it felt significant and beautiful in a way that no expensive diamond could have matched. "Do you have something for Thomas?" Judge Martinez asked gently. Maria looked around helplessly until she remembered. The small silver cross necklace she always wore, a gift from her own grandmother years ago. She unclasped it and handed it to Thomas. "It's not a ring," she said, apologetically. "It's perfect," Thomas said, putting the chain around his neck and tucking the cross under his shirt. Close to his heart, the ceremony itself took less than 10 minutes. Judge Martinez spoke about the responsibilities of marriage, about commitment and partnership and caring for each other through good times and bad. When she asked if they promised to honor and support each other, Both Maria and Thomas answered, "I do," with voices that were steady and sure. "By the power vested in me by the state of New Mexico, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Martinez said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Maria and Thomas looked at each other awkwardly. They had never even held hands for more than a few moments, and now they were supposed to kiss as married people. Thomas leaned down and gave her a gentle, brief kiss on the lips, more like a promise than a romantic gesture, but meaningful in its own way. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Running Bear," Judge Martinez said, handing them their marriage certificate. "I hope you have many happy years together." As they walked out of the courthouse, Maria felt strange and disconnected, as if she were watching someone else's life instead of living her own. In the span of one morning, she had become a married woman with a new last name and 4 stepchildren she was about to meet for the first time. "How do you feel?" Thomas asked as they got back in his truck. "Terrified," Maria admitted, "but also hopeful. Is that weird?" "Not weird at all," Thomas said. "I feel the same way." The drive to the reservation took 3 hours through beautiful but harsh desert landscape. As they got closer to their destination, Thomas began pointing out landmarks and telling Maria about his childhood. He showed her the mountain where his grandfather had taught him to hunt, the creek where he and Rebecca used to catch minnows as children, the old trading post where his grandmother still bought supplies. "It's going to be different from the city," Thomas warned her. "Quieter, more isolated. Some people might not be welcoming at first. They'll wonder who you are and why you married me so quickly." "Let them wonder," Maria said. "We know why we're doing this." The reservation clinic was a low, modern building surrounded by mobile homes and older houses. As they pulled into the parking lot, Maria could see children playing in some of the yards, their voices carrying on the desert wind. This would be her new world, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where traditions went back centuries, where she would have to learn new ways of living. Inside the clinic, a nurse led them down a hallway lined with posters about diabetes, prevention, and traditional healing practices. Maria's heart was pounding as they approached the children's room. What if Joseph didn't like her? What if the twins were too scared to trust a stranger? What if baby David screamed when she tried to hold him? "They're in here," the nurse said, softly, opening a door marked family room. The first thing Maria saw was Joseph, sitting in a chair next to a hospital bed where his baby brother was sleeping. The 8-year-old looked exactly as Thomas had described him, small for his age, but with serious, watchful eyes that seemed too old for his face. He was wearing clothes that were obviously too big for him, probably donated by the hospital. The twins, Anna and Sarah, were curled up together on a couch in the corner, sharing a blanket and whispering to each other in voices too low to hear. They looked up when Maria and Thomas entered, their dark eyes wide with curiosity and caution. "Uncle Thomas," Joseph said, standing up quickly. He ran to Thomas and wrapped his arms around his uncle's waist, finally allowing himself to look like the scared little boy he really was. "Hey, buddy," Thomas said, kneeling down to hug his nephew properly. "How are you holding up?" "I'm taking care of everyone," Joseph said, trying to sound brave. "David cried a lot last night, but I sang him the song Mama used to sing, and he went to sleep." Maria felt her heart break for this little boy who was trying so hard to be the man of the family. She watched as Thomas introduced her to the children, explaining that she was his new wife and that they were going to take care of all 4 of them together. The twins were shy, but polite, saying, "Hello, Mrs. Running Bear," in unison before returning to their whispered conversation. Baby David woke up and immediately reached for Thomas, babbling happily when his uncle picked him up. "This is your new Aunt Maria," Thomas told David, who studied Maria with the serious expression that all toddlers seem to have when meeting new people. "Hi, David," Maria said softly, holding out her hand. To her surprise and delight, the little boy reached out and grabbed her finger, holding on tightly as if he understood instinctively that she was someone he could trust. "Are you really going to take care of us?" Joseph asked Maria directly, his young face serious and searching. "I'm going to try my best," Maria answered honestly. "I know I'm not your mama, and I would never try to replace her. But I promise to..." love you and protect you and help you remember how special she was." Joseph studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The small house on the reservation looked nothing like Maria had imagined. It was a simple ranch-style home with faded blue paint and a wraparound porch that had seen better days. But as Thomas pulled into the gravel driveway with 4 sleepy children in the back seat, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of coming home. "This is where we live now," Thomas said quietly to the children as he turned off the engine. "It's not much, but it's ours." Joseph was the first to get out of the truck, his serious 8-year-old face taking in every detail of their new surroundings. The twins, Anna and Sarah, climbed out next, still holding hands like they had been doing since leaving the hospital. Baby David was fast asleep in his car seat, his thumb in his mouth and his other hand clutching a stuffed rabbit that had belonged to his mother. Maria's heart ached as she looked at these 4 children who had lost everything familiar in their young lives. In the span of a week, they had lost their mother, been in a terrible accident, spent days in a hospital, and now were being brought to live with an uncle they barely knew and a woman they had just met that morning. "Are you hungry?" Maria asked as they gathered on the porch. It was almost dinner time, and she had no idea what food was available in the house or what the children liked to eat. "We ate at the hospital," Joseph said, his voice polite but distant. He was clearly trying to be the responsible one, speaking for his siblings like he had been doing since the accident. "That was hours ago," Thomas said gently. "And hospital food isn't very good anyway. Let's see what we can find inside." The house was small but clean, with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a living room that opened into a tiny kitchen. Thomas had been living here alone since moving off the reservation for work, so there wasn't much furniture or anything that suggested children lived there. The walls were bare except for a few family photos, and the rooms echoed when they talked. "Joseph and David can share the back bedroom," Thomas explained as they walked through the house. "The twins can have the middle room, and Maria and I will take the front room." Maria felt a flutter of nervousness at the mention of sharing a bedroom with Thomas. They had gotten married for practical reasons, but they hadn't really discussed the details of their living arrangement. Looking at his face, she could see he was equally unsure about how this was going to work. The children's belongings fit into 2 small suitcases that a social worker had packed from their mother's house. As Maria watched Anna and Sarah carefully unpacking their few clothes and toys, she realized how little they had left of their old life. Everything else, their mother's furniture, her clothes, their childhood home was gone. "Where are Mama's pictures?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice small and worried. "The social worker said she would send them later," Thomas explained, kneeling down to the twins' level. "Along with anything else that belonged to your mama?" "I want her now," Anna whispered. And suddenly both twins were crying, not the loud crying of tantrums, but the quiet, heartbroken sobs of children who finally understood that their mother was never coming back. Maria looked at Thomas helplessly. What was she supposed to do? She had no experience comforting grieving children, but something deep inside her took over, some maternal instinct she didn't even know she possessed. She sat down on the floor between the twins and opened her arms. "Come here, babies," she said softly, to her surprise. Both girls immediately moved into her embrace, curling up against her like they had been doing it their whole lives. Maria held them while they cried, stroking their hair and making gentle shushing sounds the way she had seen other mothers do. "I miss her too," Maria whispered, even though she had never met Rebecca. "But you know what? I think your mama is watching over you right now, making sure you're safe and loved." "How do you know?" Sarah asked through her tears. "Because that's what mamas do," Maria said with certainty she didn't know she felt. "They never stop taking care of their children, even when they can't be there anymore." That first night was the hardest thing Maria had ever experienced. David woke up crying every few hours, calling for his mama and refusing to be comforted by anyone else. Joseph tried to help, climbing out of his own bed to rock his baby brother, but David just cried harder, finally around 3 in the morning. Maria took David from Joseph's exhausted arms and carried him to the living room. She sat in Thomas's. old recliner and held the toddler against her chest, humming a lullaby her own grandmother had sung to her years ago. "Mama," David whimpered, his little body shaking with sobs. "I know, baby," Maria whispered, tears streaming down her own face. "I know you want your mama. I'm not her, and I'll never try to be her, but I'm here now, and I love you." She rocked him for 2 hours, singing softly and telling him stories about the stars they could see through the window. Gradually, his crying turned to hiccups, then to quiet breathing, and finally to sleep. When Thomas found them in the morning, both Maria and David were asleep in the chair, the baby's small hand wrapped around her finger. The next few weeks were a constant learning experience. Maria had to figure out how to make breakfast for 4 children with completely different preferences. Joseph was a picky eater who only wanted cereal. The twins insisted on eating exactly the same thing as each other. David threw food on the floor and had strong opinions about what color cup he wanted to use. Getting them ready for school was another challenge. Joseph was supposed to start 3rd grade at the reservation school, and the twins would be in 1st grade. But none of them wanted to go, and Maria couldn't blame them. Everything in their lives was already different and scary. Why would they want to face a classroom full of strangers, too? "I don't want to go," Joseph announced on the first morning, crossing his arms and refusing to get dressed. "I understand," Maria said, sitting on his bed. "But your mama would want you to go to school? She would want you to learn and grow and have friends." "How do you know what my mama wanted?" Joseph asked, his voice sharp with anger. "You didn't even know her." The words stung, but Maria could see the pain behind his anger. This little boy was trying so hard to be strong, to take care of everyone, but he was just 8 years old and he was scared. "You're right," Maria said quietly. "I didn't know your mama, but I know she loved you more than anything in the world. And I know she wanted you to have the best life possible. Can you help me understand what that looks like?" Joseph stared at her for a long moment, clearly surprised that she hadn't gotten angry at his rudeness. Finally, he said, "She always helped me with my homework. And she came to my school plays, even when she was tired from work." "Then that's what I'll do too," Maria promised. "I'll help with your homework, and I'll come to every school play. And if you're having trouble at school, you can tell me, and we'll figure it out together." Something shifted in Joseph's expression, a tiny crack in the wall he had built around his heart. He didn't smile, but he got dressed and ate his breakfast without any more arguments. The twins were easier in some ways, but harder in others. They did everything together and had their own private language that included elaborate hand signals and whispered words that only they understood. They would spend hours playing complicated games that seemed to have rules known only to them. "Are they always like this?" Maria asked Thomas one evening as they watched Anna and Sarah arrange their stuffed animals in precise patterns on the living room floor. "Rebecca said they were like this from birth," Thomas replied. "They had their own way of communicating even before they could talk. She used to joke that they shared one brain between 2 bodies." Maria found the twins' closeness both beautiful and concerning. While it was wonderful that they had each other, she worried that they weren't connecting with anyone else. They were polite to her and Thomas, but they seemed to exist in their own little world where no one else was allowed. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after they had moved in. Maria was in the kitchen making dinner when she heard Sarah crying in the bedroom. When she went to check, she found Anna trying to comfort her sister, but Sarah was inconsolable. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Maria asked, sitting on Sarah's bed. "She had a bad dream about the car accident," Anna explained, her 6-year-old face serious and worried. "She dreams about it every night." Maria's heart broke for these little girls who were carrying such heavy burdens. "Sarah, honey, can you tell me about the dream?" Through her tears, Sarah described a nightmare where she was back in the car with her mother, but this time she couldn't wake up her mama no matter how hard she tried. It was the same dream she had been having since the accident, and it was getting worse instead of better. "I want to help, but I don't know how," Anna said, her own eyes filling with tears. "I can't make the bad dreams go away." "Maybe we can't make them go away," Maria said thoughtfully, "but maybe we can make them less scary." What if we came up with a special way to chase the bad dreams away when they come? She spent the next hour with the twins, creating an elaborate bedtime ritual that involved checking under the bed for monsters, sprinkling invisible sweet dream powder around the room, and teaching them a special song to sing if they woke up scared. It was silly and completely made up, but the girls threw themselves into it with the kind of enthusiasm that only children could muster.